The year was 1943. A film sat locked in vaults too scandalous for theaters. At the center, a woman lying in hay rewriting what was allowed on screen. This wasn't Monroe or Gardner. It was Jane Russell, and her story only gets wilder from here. The bra that launched a legend. The Outlaw wasn't supposed to be a scandal. It was a low-budget Western by Howard Hughes, starring a newcomer named Jane Russell. But Hughes had something bigger in mind. He didn't just want a movie, he wanted shock value. Russell was only 21, with no major roles behind her. Hughes cast her as Rhea McDonald, a sultry saloon girl. During filming, he became obsessed with how her figure appeared on screen. Costumes didn't give him the look he wanted, so he built his own solution, a new kind of bra. Metal rods, wiring, and padding were sewn into a custom design meant to lift her bust unnaturally high. Hughes even filed a patent for it. Jane hated it. "That thing hurt like hell," she said years later. "I threw it in the trash and wore my own." Despite that, Hughes told the press she wore his invention. He wanted the story to spread, and it did. Then came the Haystack Photo. A publicity still showed Russell reclining in hay, blouse barely holding on. No moviegoers cared about the plot. They wanted to see that image. Theaters received angry letters. Religious groups protested. One censorship board called the photo morally dangerous. The production code refused to approve the movie. Hughes had a plan. He sent fake protest letters to theaters claiming outrage from concerned citizens. It worked. Curious crowds showed up in droves. The limited release in 1943 was chaos. In New York and Los Angeles, people lined up for blocks. In some cities, police were called to manage traffic. Chicago shut the film down mid-run. Jane Russell had barely opened her mouth on screen, but her image was already burned into American culture. The Outlaw didn't make her a star because of her acting. It made her a symbol of everything Hollywood was afraid to show. The full nationwide release didn't happen until 1946. By then, she didn't need it. She was already the most talked about woman in Hollywood. And she had done it without saying a word. Headlines, contracts, and control. After The Outlaw stirred controversy in 1943, Jane Russell's name never left the papers, but behind the headlines, she was caught in a mess of studio politics, lawsuits, and image control. She hadn't asked for any of it. Howard Hughes had her locked under an exclusive contract. That meant no other studio could touch her, and she couldn't choose her roles. She later said, "I was stuck doing whatever he wanted. I couldn't even accept better parts." For years, Hughes refused to loan her out, even when major studios begged. Warner Brothers, MGM, and Paramount all showed interest. Hughes said no. During that time, Jane wasn't making movies. Instead, she was doing press, magazine covers, pin-up shoots, public appearances. It was all meant to keep her famous without ever stepping on set. She became one of the most photographed women in America without releasing a single new film. Then came the court battles. Film censors still tried to block The Outlaw from playing nationwide. Hughes fought back with everything he had, lawyers, appeals, even threats to pull his other films from theaters. Jane stayed quiet in public but admitted later she hated the circus. "I wanted to act, not pose for ads." In 1946, the film finally got wide release. It made millions. Critics weren't kind. Most called the acting wooden and the story dull. But it didn't matter. People came to see her. Hughes had turned Jane into a brand, not an actress. Finally, in 1947, Jane got a new project, Young Widow. It was her first non-Hughes production. The script had depth, and she was eager to prove she could act. But the damage had been done. Audiences still saw her as the Hey Girl. Reviews were mixed. Some praised her presence. Others said she was stiff. She later admitted she was still learning. Still, she wasn't going away. The public had decided Jane Russell was worth watching, even if no one could agree on why. For better or worse, her image had already outgrown the screen. And Hughes? He still wasn't done pulling the strings. Jane versus Hollywood. By 1948, Jane Russell was trapped between fame and frustration. She was known everywhere, but barely working. Hughes continued to control her roles and turn down outside offers. She started to push back. Hughes offered her a part in The Paleface, a comedy western with Bob Hope. Jane didn't think she could do comedy, but she said yes just to get back in front of a camera. It turned out to be a smart move. The film was a hit. Audiences loved her timing, and critics admitted she held her own next to Hope. It was the first time she got to show range. But things weren't smooth behind the scenes. Jane had no power over her career choices. Hughes micromanaged every decision. He approved costumes, scripts, even haircuts. Jane called him obsessed with control. She began quietly asking her lawyers for a way out of the contract. Meanwhile, gossip columns tracked her every move. She was photographed constantly but rarely quoted. Journalists described her as cool, hard to read, and aloof. In truth, she was tired of being treated like a mannequin. Her public image was sex symbol. In private, she was religious, blunt, and preferred quiet. In 1949, she shot The Big Steal with Robert Mitchum. The production was rushed because Mitchum had just been arrested for marijuana possession. The studio needed good press fast. Jane agreed to the project on short notice. It was a basic crime story, but again, she handled it well. Mitchum later said, "Jane was tougher than anyone gave her credit for." She wanted more like that, less glamour, more grit. But Hughes still had her locked down. In 1950, she publicly clashed with studio heads over the roles she was being offered. She turned down several scripts and refused to pose for certain publicity shots. That made her difficult in Hollywood terms. Jane wasn't playing along anymore. She wanted to act, not sell, and slowly people were starting to listen. The pinup girl had found her voice, and she was just getting warmed up. Diamonds, Blondes, and a Stolen Show. In 1953, Jane Russell landed what should have been a supporting role. Instead, she nearly stole the film. The movie? Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Her co-star? Marilyn Monroe. Monroe played the sweet, flirty Lorelei. Jane played Dorothy, the sharp brunette who called the shots. On paper, Marilyn was the lead, but on screen, Jane dominated scene after scene. Her timing was cleaner, her delivery was drier, her attitude, unshakable. Most people don't know this. Jane didn't want to do it at first. She thought the musical numbers were silly, but the studio pushed her in, and once filming started, she didn't hold back. She handled her own vocals, danced in heels, and rewrote parts of her dialogue. Monroe had more screen time, but Jane had more control. Crew members said Russell often calmed Marilyn down between takes. She reportedly helped block scenes and guided Monroe through complex shots. Then came the premiere drama. Here's the rumor. Monroe refused to attend the Blondes premiere in Hollywood, so Jane showed up alone and played both roles on the red carpet. She even signed Monroe's name for fans. Reporters called her a total pro and said she carried the night without breaking a sweat. The movie became a global hit. Jane's performance was praised for being grounded and funny, while Marilyn got the attention for her beauty. But behind the scenes, even executives said Jane held the film together. She never bragged about it. In interviews, she gave Monroe credit and avoided drama. But those who worked on the film knew the truth. Jane was the adult in the room. She showed up on time, knew her lines, and never cracked under pressure. That role cemented her as more than a body or a photo. She could act, she could command, and she could outshine a legend without even trying. Hollywood had underestimated her again, but this time everyone saw what she could really do, and Jane didn't need hay or headlines to prove it. The Hollywood Bowl baptism. In 1954, Jane Russell shocked fans again, but this time it had nothing to do with movies or costumes. She stepped into the waters of the Hollywood Bowl in front of thousands and got baptized. It wasn't a publicity stunt. Jane had always kept her faith private. She was raised in a deeply religious home and read the Bible daily. But the tension between her image and her values was growing. After years of posing in tight gowns and playing bombshell roles, she wanted to make a statement. That statement came during a Billy Graham revival event. The massive crowd watched as Jane walked into the water and was fully submerged. It made headlines the next morning. "Movie siren gets saved," one paper wrote. Others called it a mid-career pivot, but Jane didn't care. After that, she became more vocal about her beliefs. She gave interviews criticizing the moral direction of Hollywood. She said too many films celebrated sin and called some of her past work foolish. She even started a group called WAIF, World Adoption International Fund, combining her faith and advocacy. This turn confused people. She was still doing movies and still dressing glamorously, but now she was talking about Jesus on talk shows. Some fans loved it, others tuned out. The industry didn't know how to handle her shift. She didn't back down. In public speeches, she warned young actors to stay grounded and avoid the fast track to ruin. In private, she mentored struggling performers behind the scenes. But not everyone supported her. Some Hollywood insiders mocked her open faith. She was accused of being judgmental and old-fashioned. Producers called her unpredictable. Studios didn't know if she'd promote a film or preach at the premiere. Jane didn't care. She wasn't asking for approval anymore. The woman once labeled too hot for theaters was now talking about redemption and doing it on her own terms. And while the cameras rolled on others, Jane rewrote her own script in real life. Fight with the church. After several miscarriages, she decided to adopt, but adoption in the 1950s wasn't simple, especially across borders. Her first adopted son, Tommy, came from Ireland. The process took over a year. Jane grew frustrated with red tape and church politics. She believed too many kids were stuck in orphanages while paperwork dragged on. In interviews, she called the system heartless and said it cared more about rules than children. So she took matters into her own hands. In one case, she flew overseas, met with the child's caretakers, and returned with the baby before full approval. She claimed it was legal under emergency conditions. Authorities disagreed. The press labeled it baby smuggling. Jane called it saving a life. That incident pushed her to create WAIF, the World Adoption International Fund. It helped connect orphans with families worldwide. Jane used her fame to pressure lawmakers and raise money. She testified in front of Congress and worked with embassies to change regulations. But the backlash was real. Catholic leaders in Ireland accused her of undermining church-run orphanages. One priest called her reckless and self-righteous. Jane fired back, saying the church cared more about control than compassion. Despite the criticism, she expanded her work. WAIF helped place hundreds of children in homes during its peak. Jane personally reviewed applications and even helped pay travel costs for some families. She wasn't just a spokesperson, she was hands-on. This wasn't the Hollywood work people expected from a screen siren, but Jane didn't care about expectations. She said, "If I'd waited for the world's approval, I'd still be posing in hay." Her house in California became a hub for her causes. Her kids lived outside the spotlight, and she rarely talked about them publicly. But in her later interviews, she called them her greatest work. The roles in film paid the bills. The work in adoption, she said, saved her soul. Russell versus feminism. In an era when women's liberation was gaining momentum, Jane took the opposite path, and she made sure everyone knew it. She called second-wave feminism a mess of angry women yelling about problems they created. In one 1,973 interview, she said, "I don't know what they're fighting for. I never had to fight for anything." That quote alone set off a storm. Talk show hosts loved booking her. She clashed with feminist guests and stood her ground, even when audiences booed. She argued that women already had power but were wasting it on resentment. "I've worked with men my whole life," she said. "I never needed to burn my bra to get respect." Her words drew backlash. Gloria Steinem's supporters called her outdated. Some women's groups urged sponsors to drop her from endorsements. But Russell didn't flinch. She said modern feminists misunderstood strength. Strength isn't about shouting. It's about knowing who you are. She also attacked Hollywood for portraying women as helpless victims or hypersexualized cliches. Ironically, critics pointed out that her early roles did exactly that. Jane didn't deny it, but said the problem wasn't the image, it was the intention behind it. By this time, she was focused on her religious activism and charity work, but her conservative takes made headlines more than her advocacy. She called Roe v. Wade a mistake and said America needed less therapy and more churches. She wasn't trying to please anyone. The feminist movement saw her as a relic. Her fans saw her as fearless. Either way, she stayed visible. While other actresses her age faded quietly, Jane Russell kept showing up, louder, bolder, and completely unwilling to change. Love her or hate her, she refused to play the part anyone handed her. At 60 and still breaking rules. In the 1980s, most actresses from Jane Russell's era were long retired. Not Jane. At 60, she signed a national ad deal to model Playtex bras. The ads ran on television, in magazines, and in stores across America. Most women her age were expected to disappear from the spotlight, but Jane showed up in full glam, pitching support bras to real women. The tagline, "Does your bra have to show your age?" Jane didn't think so. Critics rolled their eyes. She didn't care. "I wore bras before most of these ad execs were born," she joked in an interview. "I know what works." And she meant it. The campaign was a hit. Sales spiked, especially among older women who saw her as relatable, not ridiculous. But this comeback wasn't just about ads. She started making more public appearances again. Church groups, charity galas, even morning talk shows. She wasn't doing movies, but she wasn't fading away either. She found a way to stay in front of the public without pretending to be younger than she was. And she wasn't afraid to call out ageism. When a reporter asked if she'd consider a comeback film, she replied, "Sure, if they let me play a 60-year-old woman who acts like one." She also joked that it was the first time in her life people cared about her comfort more than her figure. Back then, it was all underwire and pain. Now it's all soft cups and scents. Took long enough. The lingerie campaign made headlines, not for shock, but for surprise. No one expected Jane Russell, the once silent symbol of scandal, to become the face of grown-up confidence. She wasn't trying to seduce anymore. She was trying to relate. And that hit harder than any bombshell act ever could. In a business that tossed women aside after 40, Jane Russell didn't just refuse to disappear. She came back in a bra and reminded the world who she was. And she did it with a wink, not an apology. Outspoken, unfiltered, and unbothered. While most Golden Age stars slipped into quiet retirement, Jane cranked up the volume. She gave interviews that often went viral, at least by pre-internet standards. On one local television segment, she called modern movies trash with sound effects. She criticized rising stars for acting like victims instead of women. One host tried to steer her back to polite conversation. Jane doubled down. She also leaned harder into politics. She identified as a proud conservative, supported prayer in schools, and spoke at several Republican events. She criticized Hollywood's moral decay and said most actors today were spoiled and spineless. These statements didn't win her new fans, but they kept her in the press. In 1999, she made headlines again for all the wrong reasons. She was arrested for driving under the influence in California. Her blood alcohol level was nearly twice the legal limit. At the time, she was in her late 70s. The tabloids pounced. "Busted bombshell," read one headline. She didn't deny it, she didn't spin it, and she definitely didn't apologize in public. Instead, she joked about it later, saying, "At my age, you're lucky to get a story printed about you, even if it's for drinking." Even when called out, she rarely backed down. In one interview, she admitted she didn't believe in political correctness. "I say what I mean, and if you don't like it, turn the channel." No apologies to the end. She passed away in 2011 at the age of 89. True to form, her final years were lived without filters, edits, or apologies. She spent her last decade mostly in Santa Maria, California, staying active in her church and speaking at local events. Neighbors described her as approachable but blunt. If you asked about her past, she'd answer, but she wouldn't sugarcoat it. She didn't do nostalgic interviews. She didn't attend retrospectives. When asked why she skipped award shows or tributes, she said, "I didn't go for applause when I was working. Why would I show up for it now?" In her final interviews, she remained firm in her views. She still rejected modern feminism, still criticized Hollywood's direction, and still defended her early work, even the parts people once called scandalous. "I gave the public what they wanted," she said, "and I did it on my own terms." She also spoke about faith until the end. Church was her real stage, and she liked it that way. She called it the only place that never asked me to be something else. When news of her death broke, the headlines were predictable. Most focused on the outlaw, the hay photo, and her body. Few highlighted her decades of charity work, her fights with censors, or the fact that she'd outlasted most of her peers. Her family didn't issue a long statement. They said she passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by loved ones. No funeral spectacle, no red carpet send-off. And that felt right, because Jane Russell never needed the spotlight. She was the kind of star who took it, then handed it back when she was done. No legacy spin, no last-minute reinvention, just one final act of doing exactly what she always had. Living loud, aging honestly, and refusing to ever play by someone else's script.
Imagine if Kim Kardashian suddenly vanished from the spotlight. No money, no followers, no influence. That's exactly what happened to Anita Ekberg. She was the original Hollywood it girl, and when Hollywood was done with her, they erased her like she never existed. Swedish beauty in the spotlight. Kirsten Anita Marianne Ekberg wasn't dreaming of Hollywood. Born in 1931 in Malmö, Sweden, she was the sixth of 8 children in a working-class family. Acting wasn't on the radar. Pageants? Not really. But standing nearly 5 feet 7 inches with striking blue eyes and an hourglass figure, she stood out. At 18, she entered Miss Sweden and won. The title came with an unexpected ticket to the Miss Universe pageant in America. She didn't take home the crown, but that didn't matter. Her real prize was catching the attention of Universal Pictures. The studio saw potential, or more accurately, they saw a blonde bombshell they could mold into the next Hollywood sensation. A contract landed in front of her. No experience? No problem. Hollywood had a system for that. Once she arrived in Los Angeles, the real work began. English lessons, voice coaching, acting classes, every major studio had a formula to create a star. But learning lines wasn't the priority. Publicity was. Universal plastered her in magazines, setting up glamorous photo shoots that emphasized her figure. The iceberg, as some called her, was their answer to Marilyn Monroe, except colder, more unattainable. She was sent to premieres, mingling with A-listers to build an image before she even had a real role. These stunts worked. The press couldn't get enough of her. But inside the studio, there was a problem. Universal didn't know what to do with her. The first film appearances were blink and you'll miss it moments. Background roles, arm candy, nameless eye candy. The studio gave her a handful of minor parts, but never a real chance. It didn't take long for them to decide she lacks acting potential. 6 months in, Universal dropped her. For most Hollywood newcomers, that would have been the end. A plane ticket back to Sweden. A forgotten name in a pile of failed starlets. But Anita Ekberg wasn't done. Instead of retreating, she leaned into modeling, covers of magazines, pin-up photos that flew off newsstands. Peter Gowland, a top photographer, made her a staple of the 1950s pin-up scene. That gamble paid off. These images caught the eye of John Wayne. He cast her in Blood Alley, 1955. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Suddenly, Hollywood took another look. Paramount Pictures came calling. This time, it wasn't just for press shots. Anita Ekberg was back in the game. Finding a place in Hollywood. Hollywood had rules. If you were a blonde bombshell in the 1950s, you had 2 paths. You could be the next Marilyn Monroe, or you could be forgotten. Anita Ekberg wasn't about to let the second one happen. After a brief role in Blood Alley, 1955, Paramount Pictures took a chance on her. They didn't see an actress, they saw an asset. Their mission? Sell her as Hollywood's next big thing. The studio had a formula for stardom. It wasn't about talent, it was about image. Ekberg was sent to glitzy Hollywood parties, strategically placed next to the biggest names in the business. Photo shoots were arranged, plastering her across fan magazines. Studio publicists fed stories to gossip columns, painting her as a dazzling newcomer. Everything was designed to make her a household name before she even had a real career. Ekberg was placed in big-budget films alongside major stars, not as the lead, but as the distraction. In War and Peace, 1956, she played a glamorous aristocrat opposite Audrey Hepburn and Henry Fonda. The film was a massive production, but Ekberg's role, pure decoration. Then came Hollywood or Bust, 1956, a comedy with Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. The title was ironic, because for her, this was a make-or-break moment. She had the looks, the presence, but could she act? Studios weren't convinced. Critics weren't either. The press described her as decorative. The message was clear. She was there to be looked at, not taken seriously. Despite that, she wasn't going unnoticed. Famed columnist Walter Winchell called her the most perfectly constructed blonde ever. Directors kept casting her, but always in roles that didn't require depth. By the late 1950s, her on-screen image as a sex symbol started overshadowing her career. She was featured in countless pin-up spreads, labeled as one of Hollywood's most desirable women. Fans loved it. Casting agents? Not so much. Meanwhile, European actresses like Sophia Loren were proving their versatility. They played dramatic roles, showed range, and built lasting careers. Loren had been cast in challenging roles that showed depth, proving she was more than just a beauty. Ekberg, on the other hand, was still Hollywood's go-to exotic blonde. She tried breaking the mold, took roles in Paris Holiday, 1958, with Bob Hope, hoping comedy would give her a fresh start. But the industry had already made up its mind. She was a face, not a talent. By the late 1950s, her Hollywood career was stalling. Paramount had promoted her, used her, but never truly invested in her. She wasn't being offered the roles that made a career last. The industry was shifting. Studios were looking for more than just a pretty face. The new wave of actresses, Elizabeth Taylor, Shirley MacLaine, and even young newcomers like Jane Fonda, were proving they could be more than just beautiful. Ekberg, despite her fame, was being left behind. She was famous. But fame wasn't translating into respect. She needed something big, something to make Hollywood take her seriously. Then, in 1960, Federico Fellini called, everything was about to change. A career in limbo. By 1960, Hollywood had given up on Anita Ekberg. She was famous but not respected, glamorous but not essential. Then Federico Fellini saw something others didn't. The Italian director was preparing a film that would redefine cinema. La Dolce Vita wasn't a traditional Hollywood production. It was stylish, provocative, and unlike anything Ekberg had done before. Fellini didn't just want a blonde bombshell, he wanted an icon. The role of Sylvia wasn't complex. She was a famous actress, desired by everyone, but truly known by no one. Ekberg didn't need to act much. She just had to be Sylvia. Then came the Trevi Fountain scene. Filming took place on a freezing winter night in Rome. Ekberg, draped in a flowing black gown, stepped into the cold waters of the Trevi Fountain, calling to Marcello Mastroianni. She was hypnotic, ethereal, a living fantasy. Mastroianni, struggling through the cold, reportedly had to wear a wetsuit under his tuxedo just to endure the temperature. Ekberg? She didn't flinch. She moved through the water as if she were made for it. The scene was electric. Even Pope John XXIII reportedly criticized it for being immoral. That only made it more famous. When La Dolce Vita premiered, it was an instant phenomenon. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. It shocked audiences, outraged censors, and redefined European cinema. Ekberg became the face of it all. The press couldn't stop talking about her. The Trevi Fountain scene turned her into a global symbol of beauty and mystery. But there was a catch. The role that made her immortal also typecast her forever. Directors didn't see a rising actress. They saw a fantasy. Producers weren't offering complex scripts. They wanted Sylvia. Fellini remained a fan. He cast her in Boccaccio 70, 1962, and later The Clowns, 1970. But outside of Italy, the phone stopped ringing. Hollywood turns its back on her. After La Dolce Vita, Anita Ekberg had everything: fame, international recognition, and a defining cinematic moment. But none of it translated into what she wanted most: a serious Hollywood career. The industry had already made up its mind. She wasn't a leading lady. She was an image. She returned to the U.S., hoping her European success would change things. It didn't. Studios still saw her as a one-note star. No challenging roles, no career reinvention, just more offers to play the blonde bombshell. Sophia Loren was getting dramatic roles. Brigitte Bardot was proving herself as more than a pin-up. Even Marilyn Monroe, despite her struggles, had a legacy Hollywood was invested in. Ekberg? She was trapped. She landed a role in Four for Texas, 1963, starring alongside Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. On paper, it looked like a comeback. In reality, she was just window dressing. It was the same story with Woman Times 7, 1967, an anthology film featuring Shirley MacLaine, a decent cast, a well-known director, but Ekberg's presence barely mattered. Meanwhile, Hollywood was changing. The 60s ushered in a new era. Sex symbols weren't enough anymore. Actresses had to be versatile. Studios wanted stars who could carry a film, not just decorate it. Younger faces were taking over. Jane Fonda, Faye Dunaway, Raquel Welch, actresses who blended beauty with depth. Ekberg was left behind. Hollywood had shut the door, and she never found a way to reopen it. A tumultuous love life. Anita Ekberg's name was in the press as much for her personal life as for her movies. The tabloids loved her. And Hollywood? Not in a good way. Her beauty made her irresistible to the world's most powerful men. Actors, singers, billionaires. She was linked to them all. The rumors started with Frank Sinatra. He had a thing for glamorous blondes, and she fit the bill. Were they serious? Probably not. But the press made sure everyone thought so. Then came Tyrone Power, one of Hollywood's biggest leading men. They were seen together just before he died suddenly in 1958. Whether they were truly involved is up for debate, but Ekberg's name was in every headline. Then there was Gianni Agnelli, the heir to the Fiat empire. He had a reputation for seducing Hollywood's most stunning women, and Ekberg was one of them. Italian newspapers loved their supposed affair, adding fuel to her growing status as Europe's most talked-about actress. But her most chaotic relationship was with Anthony Steele. A British actor, Steele was once poised for stardom. Then he met Ekberg. Instead of being Hollywood's next power couple, they became tabloid gold, for all the wrong reasons. Steele had a drinking problem, and a jealousy problem, and a temper. The fights were legendary. One night, he allegedly destroyed their home in a drunken rage. Another time, he accused her of cheating in public, making a scene at a glamorous party. Despite the drama, they married in 1956. It lasted 3 years. By the time the divorce was finalized in 1959, Steele's career was over. Ekberg's was still alive, but barely. Even after her marriage ended, she stayed a favorite target for the press. By the 1960s, her film career was slowing down, but the tabloids weren't done with her. Rumors swirled that she had an affair with Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi of Iran. Some claimed she had been secretly invited to his palace. She denied everything. Whether true or not, her reputation was now built on scandal, not talent. And in Hollywood, that was a problem. Directors wanted actresses who took their careers seriously, not ones making headlines for their personal lives. Desperate attempts to stay relevant. Hollywood had shut Anita out. Europe still gave her work, but the roles weren't meaningful. She was famous, but fame wasn't getting her anywhere. Directors weren't casting her in serious films. Instead, she was booked for forgettable projects, low-budget comedies, action films, and movies that existed to show off her looks rather than her talent. In 1963, she starred in 4 for Texas alongside Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. On paper, it seemed like a solid opportunity, big stars, a mainstream Hollywood production, but her role was just another sexy distraction. She was still playing the same one-dimensional bombshell characters Hollywood had always given her. A few years later, she appeared in Woman x 7, 1967, an ensemble film led by Shirley MacLaine. It was a respectable project with an acclaimed director, Vittorio De Sica, but Ekberg's part was small. A decade earlier, she had been treated as a rising star. Now, she was barely making an impact. Meanwhile, the industry was moving on. Hollywood was no longer obsessed with glamorous European bombshells. The 1970s ushered in a new era of filmmaking, gritty, realistic, and socially conscious. Women like Jane Fonda, Faye Dunaway, and Ellen Burstyn were leading blockbusters, not just looking good in them. Ekberg was stuck in the past. Desperate to keep her career alive, she returned to Italy. It seemed like a smart move. After all, La Dolce Vita had made her an icon there, but even Italy wasn't the same anymore. The golden era of extravagant, glamorous European cinema was fading. Realism and political storytelling were taking over. Directors were casting women with depth and versatility, and Ekberg's name wasn't on the list. She reunited with Federico Fellini for The Clowns, 1970. It should have been a big deal. But the film wasn't a success, and Ekberg's role was minor. She was a shadow of what she once was. More minor European films followed. She worked steadily, but the films were low budget and forgettable. By the 1980s, things were getting worse. The offers slowed to a trickle. When she did get cast, it was in B-movies. She appeared in low-quality Italian productions and forgettable roles that barely played outside of Europe. She had once been the face of European cinema. Now she was just a familiar name clinging to an industry that had moved on. By the 1990s, her film career was barely alive. There were no major directors calling, no starring roles, no career revival. Instead, she made random appearances in small projects, often playing exaggerated versions of herself, a guest spot on an Italian TV show, a cameo in a film few people watched. The glamour was gone. Even Federico Fellini, her biggest supporter, passed away in 1993. With him, the last real connection to her golden years was gone. It was clear her career was over, but instead of stepping away gracefully, she kept taking whatever she could get. A woman who had once worked with Hollywood's biggest names was now appearing in direct-to-video flops. By the time the 2000s arrived, the work had dried up completely. There were no big comebacks, no second chances, no reinvention. Ekberg had been one of the most famous women in the world. Now she was barely a footnote in Hollywood history. Financial ruin and personal hardships. For decades, she had lived like the fortune would never dry up. Lavish homes, extravagant shopping sprees, 5-star hotels, she never held back. Unlike other stars who invested wisely or built second careers, she spent without caution. She had never imagined a life where the film offers stopped. But they did. Hollywood had already abandoned her, and Europe was no longer paying her bills. By the 1990s, the financial trouble turned into a full-blown crisis. She had no steady income, no savings, and no fallback plan. Then came the Italian tax authorities. In 1999, she was accused of owing nearly $350,000 in unpaid taxes. She denied it, calling the claims exaggerated, but the legal battle dragged on for years. The penalties kept growing, the stress piled up. Whatever little money she had left was disappearing fast. Then in 2004, disaster struck again. While she was away, burglars broke into her villa outside of Rome. They took everything: jewelry, furniture, valuables, even personal keepsakes from her Hollywood days. The few remnants of her once glamorous life were gone in an instant. She later claimed the thieves were people she trusted, maybe former employees, maybe old acquaintances. But by then, it didn't matter. The damage was done. With no career, no major assets, and no way to recover financially, she was forced to downsize her life completely. Her beloved villa, where she had lived for decades, was repossessed. She had no choice but to move into a modest home outside of Rome. The woman who had once graced magazine covers, red carpets, and exclusive parties was now struggling just to keep a roof over her head. But she never admitted defeat. Even when the press caught glimpses of her in later years, heavier, older, no longer the bombshell, she still carried herself like a star. She refused to beg for money, refused to sell her story to tabloids. When asked about her financial struggles, she shrugged it off, saying, "I have lived, I have loved, I have had adventures." But behind closed doors, the reality was grim. Health problems were piling up: diabetes, arthritis, chronic pain. The years of indulgence and excess had caught up with her. By the late 2000s, she was barely able to walk. But she didn't want pity. She refused to ask for help, even when she needed it. Then, in 2011, disaster struck again. A bad fall left her with a fractured hip and femur. The injury ended her independence completely. She was now confined to a wheelchair, reliant on others for basic needs. Medical bills piled up, money was running out. In one of her final interviews, she admitted she had no family to rely on, no financial safety net. She was living in a modest care home outside Rome, surviving on a small pension. She had once ruled the silver screen. Now she was alone, forgotten, and barely getting by. The fall had taken her mobility, but Hollywood had taken everything else. How Hollywood forgot Anita Ekberg. Anita Ekberg's name was barely mentioned in Hollywood. Her face was still immortalized in La Dolce Vita, but the woman herself? She was forgotten. No industry tributes, no retrospectives, just a fading memory of a time when she had been everywhere. In 2011, after her crippling fall left her wheelchair-bound, she made one final plea for help. She reached out to the Fellini Foundation hoping for financial assistance. The response? Silence. The same industry that once paraded her around like a goddess had left her to fend for herself. Meanwhile, her contemporaries, Sophia Loren, Brigitte Bardot, even Marilyn Monroe's legacy, were still celebrated. Their films were studied, their careers honored. Ekberg? She had no such revival. On January 11, 2015, at 83 years old, she passed away in a small clinic in Italy. The cause? Complications from long-term illnesses. There was no Hollywood send-off, no major tributes, just a brief news cycle mention before the world moved on. Even in death, she was overshadowed. Her passing came days before the Oscars, an event where Hollywood celebrates itself. Not a single mention of her that night. The industry that once built her up had erased her like she was never there. Meanwhile, La Dolce Vita remained a cinematic masterpiece. The Trevi Fountain scene still graced film school lectures and pop culture discussions, but Ekberg's role in it was often reduced to a visual, not a performance. Critics credited Fellini for the scene's magic. Some argued Marcello Mastroianni's reaction was what made it work. Ekberg was just there. That's how Hollywood remembered her. Not as an actress, but as a beautiful image frozen in time. Unlike her peers, she never reinvented herself. Never became a producer, director, or industry powerhouse. She let Hollywood define her. One stare stopped a director cold. One scene made censors panic. And one decision nearly ended her career. Gene Simmons didn't hint. She exposed. This isn't your grandmother's Hollywood story. War-era debut with big impact. Gene Simmons was just 14 when she stepped onto a movie set for the first time. The film, Give Us the Moon. It was a light comedy, but casting directors noticed something deeper in her, a mix of innocence and edge that didn't feel rehearsed. By 1945, she landed a small role in Caesar and Cleopatra, acting opposite Vivien Leigh and Claude Rains. Jean had no formal training, but her eyes stole every frame. Even with just a few lines, critics pointed her out. One review said she had more presence than most stars twice her age. That attention didn't go unnoticed. Back in London, she was already becoming a studio favorite. Directors liked that she followed direction perfectly, but still added something of her own. No one could quite explain it. She was quiet, respectful, but then delivered a performance with a surprising heat that caught people off guard. During this time, Britain was still recovering from war. Rationing was in full swing. But Jean was getting fitted for costumes, stepping onto grand sets and showing up in magazines. For a country looking for escape, she became a symbol of post-war hope and a bit of fantasy. Producers began casting her in roles meant for older actresses. She had the look of a teenager, but the screen presence of a woman who'd lived through something. It made her unpredictable and hard to forget. The studios liked that, so did the public. What really set her apart, though, wasn't talent alone. It was how she made every close-up feel intimate. She didn't perform to the camera. She let the camera come to her. That kind of restraint, especially at 15, felt dangerous in the best way. Ophelia role that shocked all. At only 18, she was cast opposite Laurence Olivier, who also directed and starred as Hamlet. It was a bold choice. Some said she was too young, too unknown. But Olivier saw something in her others didn't. The moment the film premiered, critics couldn't stop talking. Her Ophelia was fragile but intense. The breakdown scene where she spirals into madness hit like a punch. She didn't scream or flail. She barely raised her voice, but her eyes, they told a story no one could look away from. One director on set said, "She didn't act the scene. She became it." That scene became one of the most talked about performances of the year. Some called it mesmerizing. Others said it was too much, too raw for such a young actress. The censors weren't thrilled either. They flagged her emotional scenes as too suggestive, even though she wasn't doing anything explicit. Just her face, sad, broken, and unfiltered, made people uncomfortable. Not because she did something wrong, but because she did it too well. Her performance earned her an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress. It was rare for a British actress that young to get that kind of recognition in Hollywood, but Jean made it look effortless. What no one saw, though, was how tightly controlled the set was. Olivier was known to push actors hard. Simmons was often left exhausted after long takes. Some scenes took over a dozen tries just to get the right version of her breakdown. She never complained. Hamlet didn't just boost her career. It showed the world she wasn't afraid of complex roles. She didn't need flashy lines or big gestures. She used silence, stillness, and just one look. This wasn't a breakout. This was a warning. Jean Simmons didn't just belong in movies. She could change how they felt. Barefoot and bold in Himalayas. Jean Simmons wasn't the lead in Black Narcissus, but she might as well have been. She played Kanchi, a teenage girl from the Himalayas. No lines, no backstory, just movement, emotion, and presence. And it was enough to shake audiences and critics. She wore a thin sari, little makeup, and walked barefoot in most scenes. Her performance wasn't subtle. It was bold, sensual, and totally silent. For someone trained in British restraint, she went the other way completely. Viewers couldn't believe it was the same girl from Hamlet. The censors? They freaked out. A British girl in brownface was already controversial, but it was her physicality, how she walked, how she looked at men, how she moved through space, that made it feel charged. Some scenes were almost cut. Critics didn't know whether to praise her or scold her. What made it even wilder? Jean was only 19. She wasn't experienced in dance or physical theater. She learned everything on the spot, guided by directors Powell and Pressburger. They told her, "Don't think, just feel." And she did. The result was magnetic. Behind the scenes, Simmons was nervous. She worried about looking ridiculous. She hated the heavy body makeup. But when she saw the final cut, she realized she'd done something rare. She made people watch without saying a word. Her performance added tension to a film already full of it. Nuns fighting desire, isolation in the mountains, repressed emotions ready to blow. Jean's character was the spark, the reminder that human want couldn't be hidden forever. She wasn't glamorized. She wasn't polished. She was raw and young and almost too real for the screen. Audiences either gasped or looked away. That role changed everything. From then on, casting directors saw her differently. She could play quiet, yes, but she could also play dangerous. Not loud or messy, but the kind of dangerous that sneaks up on you. Marriage that silenced her voice. She married Stuart Granger in 1950. On paper, it looked like a Hollywood love story. He was a big name. She was the rising star. The press called them elegant, glamorous, perfect. But the truth behind the curtain was less romantic and a lot more complicated. Granger was 16 years older. He was already famous when Jean met him on set. Their chemistry started fast. So did the control. Soon after the wedding, Granger took the reins. On decisions, on deals, even on what roles she took. The studios loved the image. They paraded the couple in magazines. But people close to Jean started noticing changes. She lost weight. She got quieter on set. Her fire was still there, but it felt dimmed. Granger didn't hide his jealousy. He hated how much attention Jean got. When she was offered lead roles, he often stepped in, saying the scripts weren't right for her. Some insiders say he even turned down roles on her behalf without telling her. Their marriage became a talking point, not for romance, but for the tension it created in her career. One studio exec said, "Jean was gold, but we couldn't get to her without going through Stuart." Still, she stayed, at least for a while. She did interviews with a smile. She played the devoted wife, but behind closed doors, she started pushing back. She wanted control over her own contracts. She wanted to work in America. Granger wasn't happy about it. The tension spilled into work. On the set of Young Bess, she reportedly clashed with crew members over last-minute changes made by Granger, who was constantly advising from behind the scenes. By the early 50s, it was clear this marriage wasn't boosting her career. It was stalling it, and Jean knew it. The girl who once shocked the screen in silence was now fighting to speak up off it. She sued Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes didn't hear no very often, but Jean Simmons gave it to him clear, firm, and without a pause. In 1951, she was under contract with the Rank organization in the UK, but Hughes wanted her for RKO in Hollywood, so he bought her contract. At first, it looked like a career jackpot. Bigger films, bigger budget, international stardom. But there was a catch. Hughes didn't want to make her a star. He wanted to own her. He sent her lavish gifts, jewelry, perfume, clothes. She sent them right back. He offered her roles, but only in projects he controlled. Scripts were delayed, promises were broken. Jean was stuck, contractually tied to RKO but barely working. Then came the final straw. Hughes tried to force her into a long-term extension. Jean said no. He pushed harder. She pushed back and sued him. That was a career gamble very few actresses would have dared to make, especially against a man with Hughes' power and reach. The court battle was ugly. She was accused of being ungrateful, difficult, spoiled, but she didn't flinch. Her attorney argued Hughes was deliberately obstructing her career, and he was. The judge sided with Jean. The court granted her the right to make one more film under RKO, but after that, she was free. That final film would be Angel Face, more on that next. The whole ordeal made headlines. Jean had taken on one of Hollywood's biggest moguls, and won. What made it wild wasn't just that she fought back, it was how calm she stayed doing it. No public outbursts, no gossip columns, just quiet, steady defiance. After the case, other actresses started to take note. Simmons had done what they were told was impossible. She stood up to the system without destroying herself in the process. Slip dress scene that stung. Angel Face was supposed to be just another noir, but Jean Simmons turned it into something unforgettable and nearly unwatchable for the censors. Directed by Otto Preminger, the film paired her with Robert Mitchum in a twisted love story full of mind games and manipulation. From her first scene, something felt off. In a good way, she wore a silk slip and moved through the frame like she knew exactly how much control she had. It was quiet, calculated, dangerous. Preminger pushed her hard. Some days, she left set in tears. One scene, where she slaps Mitchum, turned chaotic. He slapped her back. For real, not in the script. The camera kept rolling. That take made it into the final cut. The most talked-about scene was filmed in her bedroom. Jean wore a skimpy nightgown that barely passed code. Her expression? Cold, unreadable, hypnotic. Studio executives tried to reshoot it. Preminger refused. Simmons never apologized. The scene stayed. Critics weren't sure what to make of her. One said she was too still, too unreadable. Another called her performance the quietest form of violence ever filmed. Audiences didn't know whether to root for her or run from her. That's exactly what Preminger wanted. Off-screen, Simmons kept it professional, but distant. She didn't like Preminger's style, but she respected the result. "It wasn't fun," she once said, but it worked. She knew what the role demanded, and she gave it, without blinking. Angel Face didn't do big box office, but it became a cult classic. Directors studied it, actresses copied her stillness, and fans replayed that one-bedroom scene like it was gospel. It proved she could lead a film, and terrify you doing it. This wasn't Gene Simmons the ingenue, this was Gene Simmons with teeth, and once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Backless Photo stirred a storm. The robe was supposed to be a biblical epic, clean, reverent, traditional, but Gene Simmons made sure it came with a side of scandal, not because of anything in the script, but because of a single photograph. A promotional shot of Simmons in costume, barebacked, turned slightly, eyes locked on the lens, made its way into a national magazine. And suddenly people weren't talking about Roman history. They were talking about that image. She wasn't unclothed, but she didn't need to be. The curve of her back, the look on her face, it was suggestive without trying. It sparked a wave of backlash from conservative groups. Some theaters threatened to pull the film unless the image was censored. The studio quickly ordered retouched versions covering her back with added fabric. Simmons didn't protest. She also didn't apologize. What most people didn't know was that the robe marked the beginning of her freedom. It was her first film after winning her legal battle with Howard Hughes and RKO. No more interference, no more stalled scripts. She was finally in control of her career, or so she thought. Behind the scenes, she was still untangling contract fallout. Though legally free, industry politics meant many producers were hesitant to cast her right away. Her refusal to play by studio rules made her difficult. So even as The Robe became a box office hit, Jean was still proving she was bankable and independent. She was also stepping into a new kind of role, the strong, morally complex woman. No longer the wide-eyed ingenue, she now played characters torn by faith, loyalty, and quiet desire. That's what made her stand out in The Robe. While others delivered grand speeches, Jean did more with a glance or a pause. Staring down Spartacus with fire. By the mid-1950s, Gene Simmons had mastered the art of subtle danger. She didn't have to raise her voice or storm into a room to command attention. One stare from her could flip the energy of an entire scene, and nowhere was that more obvious than in Spartacus. She played Varinia, strong-willed, patient, deeply loving. But she wasn't just the love interest. She was the emotional core of the film, the quiet resistance behind Spartacus's rebellion. When Kirk Douglas's character meets her, she doesn't beg or flirt. She watches, she listens, and that look, equal parts softness and defiance, spoke volumes. The film was massive, huge budget, massive cast, but Simmons never got lost in the crowd. Even surrounded by warriors and senators, her presence held steady. One key scene in a bathhouse, fully clothed but emotionally bare, had audiences holding their breath. She wasn't there to seduce, but somehow she did. Director Stanley Kubrick said she could do more with silence than most actors could with 3 pages of dialogue. And that was true. She didn't rely on flashy performances. Her strength was restraint, holding back just enough to make viewers lean in. Her chemistry with Douglas was real, on screen at least. Off-screen, things were more tense. Douglas, ever the perfectionist, reportedly tried to direct her at times. Jean didn't bite. She followed Kubrick's lead and stuck to her style, one that didn't need constant rehearsal or rewrites, just space to breathe. What made Spartacus different was that it showed how far she had come. She was no longer being told how to act, dress, or behave. She chose this role, and she shaped it into something bigger than what was on the page. By now, Simmons had developed a signature move, holding the camera's gaze just a second too long. It was never overdone, just enough to make the audience shift in their seats. That was her gift. Making discomfort feel beautiful, making modesty feel provocative. Post-divorce roles, no apologies. When Jean Simmons divorced Stuart Granger in 1960, Hollywood expected her to fade into the background. Instead, she did the opposite. She stepped into some of the boldest roles of her career. She wasn't trying to shock anyone, but she was finally calling the shots. And the first move? Elmer Gantry. In the film, she played Sister Sharon Falconer, a preacher with power, mystery, and unshakable confidence. Opposite Burt Lancaster, Simmons didn't flinch. Their chemistry felt electric, even hostile at times. Her character wasn't there to be conquered. She had her own mission and her own secrets. The role marked a shift. This was Jean fully in control. No studio head pulling strings, no husband weighing in, and it showed. Critics called her performance chillingly calm and quietly commanding. Audiences saw a version of Simmons they hadn't before, fierce, focused, and completely in her element. After that, the walls came down. In interviews, she started to speak more candidly. She admitted how controlled her earlier career had been. She talked about being dressed like a doll, told where to sit, when to smile. "I wasn't rebellious," she said, "I just had a brain." She also started choosing roles that mirrored her real-life complexity. In Life at the Top, she played a woman trapped in a cold marriage, giving one of her most emotionally raw performances. Critics noted how much pain she conveyed without raising her voice. Simmons had always known how to make silence speak, but now it screamed. By 1964, she had officially left her ingenue past behind. Her new characters were layered, modern, and sometimes bitter, but never weak. Whether playing women burned by love or cornered by power, Simmons always brought a sharp, grounded realism. Her personal life, she kept it quiet, no tabloid stunts, just work, and that work spoke volumes. Jean Simmons had survived the studio system, defied Hollywood men, and walked away from a toxic marriage. What came next wasn't a comeback, it was her full arrival. TV role that changed everything. In 1983, when most of her peers had faded into cameos or early retirement, Jean Simmons made a move that surprised everyone. She went to television. And not just any TV role. She signed on for The Thornbirds, a sweeping, high-stakes miniseries that would become a cultural event. She played Fiona Cleary, the cold, emotionally distant matriarch of the family. It was a huge shift from the warm, gentle characters people associated with Simmons. Fiona wasn't cruel, but she wasn't loving either. She was closed off, wounded, and quietly ruthless. And Jean played her with absolute control. Audiences didn't just watch The Thornbirds, they devoured it. Nearly 100 million people tuned in. Simmons held her ground against heavy hitters like Richard Chamberlain and Barbara Stanwyck. And in some scenes, she stole the spotlight entirely. It wasn't just the lines she delivered, it was how she sat, how she paused, how she looked away at just the right second. For that performance, she won the Emmy. But more than that, she won back visibility. She proved that actresses over 50 weren't just background players. They could lead, they could drive a story, and they could be just as bold, if not bolder, than they'd been decades earlier. Behind the scenes, Simmons was calm, professional, and laser-focused. Younger cast members described her as gracious but guarded. She wasn't there for gossip, she was there to work. One crew member recalled, "She'd walk onto set, say almost nothing, and nail it on the first take." That role capped off her transformation, from teenage ingenue to Hollywood rebel, from silent power to full-on matriarch. She had nothing left to prove, but somehow still delivered performances that left audiences stunned. Jean Simmons didn't reinvent herself, she just kept showing up exactly as she was, smart, subtle, and impossible to ignore. And by the time The Thornbirds aired, one thing was clear. She never needed to scream to make the whole room gasp. "You've been scammed. Hollywood didn't just sell you movies, it sold you fake lives, scripted love stories, and actors pretending to be people they never were. Fake identities. Hollywood isn't just about make-believe on screen. For decades, studios controlled every detail of their stars' lives, including their names, ages, and backgrounds. If someone didn't fit the perfect Hollywood mold, they were remade from the ground up. Take Rita Hayworth. She was born Margarita Cancino, but Columbia Pictures thought her name and dark hair were too foreign. The fix? A painful makeover. Her hairline was raised through electrolysis, her hair was dyed red, and just like that, a brand new star was born. Rock Hudson was never really Rock Hudson. His real name was Roy Harold Scherer Jr., but his agent, Henry Wilson, wanted something stronger, more masculine. The studio also erased details about his personal life, making sure the public saw only the leading man fantasy. Jean Harlow's birth year? Faked. Studios made her younger to fit their narrative. Judy Garland's image as the girl next door? A total illusion. Behind the scenes, MGM forced her onto a brutal diet of pills to keep her thin and working long hours. Some lies went deeper. Loretta Young's supposed adoption of a child? That was actually her own daughter, secretly born after an affair with Clark Gable. But Hollywood couldn't let that scandal go public, so they crafted a fake adoption story. Back then, if an actor didn't fit the perfect Hollywood fantasy, they got rewritten. Didn't sound American enough? They changed your name? Didn't look the part? They forced makeovers. Had a personal life that didn't match their image? That was buried. Studios weren't just making movies. They were building illusions, selling audiences a fantasy both on screen and off. And if a star didn't play along, they could kiss their career goodbye. Fake Hollywood love stories. Hollywood didn't just rewrite backgrounds, it scripted relationships too. If a star's real love life didn't fit their image, studios stepped in and fixed it. Rock Hudson was America's heartthrob, but the studio couldn't let fans know he was gay, so they staged a quickie marriage with Phyllis Gates, his agent's secretary. The press ate it up, and Hudson kept his leading man status. Judy Garland had her own love life controlled by MGM. The studio forced her into relationships that looked good in magazines, including a publicized romance with Mickey Rooney. It wasn't real, but it sold tickets. Jean Harlow was known as the ultimate bombshell, so when she got involved with Paul Byrne, a much older MGM executive, the studio promoted it as a great love story. But 2 months after their wedding, Byrne died in what was officially ruled a suicide. Hollywood went into damage control, spinning the story to protect Harlow's reputation. Even Tab Hunter, another closeted actor, was given fake girlfriends like Natalie Wood to keep up appearances. The press played along, reporting on dates that never actually happened. And then there was Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher. Hollywood sold them as the perfect couple, young, in love, and America's sweethearts. But when Fisher left Reynolds for Elizabeth Taylor, the public was outraged. The studios scrambled, painting Reynolds as the wronged woman and Taylor as the villain, though the truth was far more complicated. For decades, Hollywood ran a matchmaking machine, not for love but for headlines. Stars were paired off, breakups were staged, and entire marriages were set up just to control public perception. The wholesome stars with dark secrets. Hollywood loves a good clean-cut image. But behind the smiles and staged interviews, some of its biggest stars had secrets the studios worked overtime to hide. Bing Crosby was the ultimate family man. At least, that's what the public saw. Off-screen, his son later described him as a strict and sometimes violent father. The studios kept that part quiet, making sure audiences only saw the charming crooner. Fred Astaire was sold as the gentleman of dance, but many of his co-stars didn't see him that way. He was known for his brutal perfectionism and sometimes treated his dance partners harshly. The truth didn't fit his brand, so Hollywood kept it out of sight. Then there was Joan Crawford, the elegant leading lady. While she dazzled on screen, her adopted daughter, Christina, later exposed the truth in Mommy Dearest. a book that described Crawford's behind-the-scenes temper and alleged abuse. The studios, of course, had always portrayed her as a loving mother. Walt Disney built an empire on family-friendly entertainment, but his personal relationships with employees and his views on unions weren't as magical. His company projected an image of warmth and creativity while quietly silencing critics. Even Lucille Ball, America's comedy sweetheart, had her share of secrets. Studios worked to downplay her brief involvement with the Communist Party to keep her out of scandal. Had the public known at the time, it could have ended her career. Hollywood had a formula: market the actors as perfect, erase anything that didn't fit, and make sure the press played along. If a star had a bad reputation, it was buried. If they had a scandal, it was covered up. And if they ever spoke out about the industry's control, they were replaced. Actors who faked their stunts. Hollywood loves to sell the idea that its biggest stars are fearless, throwing punches, jumping off buildings, and pulling off impossible stunts. But the truth, many of them never even came close. John Wayne, the tough guy cowboy, wasn't as rugged as his movies made him seem. In reality, he avoided dangerous stunts, relying on doubles for fight scenes, horseback riding, and almost anything risky. Yakima Canutt, one of Hollywood's best stuntmen, did many of Wayne's most famous action sequences, including the legendary stagecoach stunt in Stagecoach 1939. Even classic swashbucklers like Errol Flynn needed help. He played fearless adventurers, but during intense sword fights and dangerous leaps, it was usually a double in costume. Studios covered it up because his image as a dashing hero had to stay intact. Then there's Charlton Heston, best known for Ben-Hur, 1959. That incredible chariot race? Most of it was done by stuntman Joe Canutt, who even got injured during a fall that audiences assumed was Heston himself. Fast forward to modern Hollywood, and the myth continues. Tom Cruise is famous for doing his own stunts, and while he really does take risks, he still has doubles for specific shots. The does everything himself story is great for marketing, but the truth is more complicated. Some stars didn't even try to fake it. Drew Barrymore admitted she didn't do a single stunt in Charlie's Angels. It was all professionals in wigs. And in The Fast and the Furious, Paul Walker and Vin Diesel had stunt doubles for most high-risk scenes, despite the franchise's tough guy branding. Hollywood thrives on illusion, and stunts are no different. If an actor's reputation relies on them being a fearless action star, studios will do whatever it takes to keep that fantasy alive. The reality? While the credits roll, the real heroes, the stunt doubles, walk away without the applause. Performances. Hollywood manipulated. Not every legendary performance was the result of raw talent. Sometimes actors were coached, pressured, or even tricked into delivering unforgettable moments. And in some cases, what you saw on screen wasn't even them. Take Shelley Duvall in The Shining, 1980. Her terrified breakdowns weren't just great acting. Director Stanley Kubrick psychologically tormented her for months to get the reaction he wanted. He isolated her from the cast, made her redo scenes over 100 times, and caused so much stress that her hair started falling out. The result? An iconic performance, but at a massive personal cost. Then there's Tippi Hedren in The Birds, 1963. Her final scene, where birds attack her, was completely real. Director Alfred Hitchcock promised mechanical birds, but then threw live ones at her, day after day. Hedren was scratched, pecked, and left emotionally wrecked. The terror you see? It wasn't acting, it was survival. And sometimes, performances were literally replaced. Audrey Hepburn charmed audiences in My Fair Lady, 1964, but that breathtaking singing voice? Not hers. The studio hired Marni Nixon to dub nearly every song. Hepburn only found out after filming, and she was furious. Even in modern Hollywood, manipulation happens. Leonardo DiCaprio's raw pain in Django Unchained, 2012, after smashing a glass? That was real. He actually cut his hand mid-scene but kept acting, so director Quentin Tarantino used it. Some actors were coached to perfection. Marlon Brando struggled with lines in The Godfather, 1972, so cue cards were placed around the set to guide him. That legendary performance? Half of it was reading off hidden scripts. Hollywood sells us the idea of pure, effortless talent. But the truth? Many great performances were manipulated, forced, or even faked. And if an actor didn't deliver, the director made sure they had no choice. Actors who didn't deserve their Oscars. Winning an Oscar is supposed to be the ultimate proof of an actor's talent, but sometimes those golden statues weren't earned. They were bought, stolen, or given for the wrong reasons. Take Elizabeth Taylor's Best Actress win for Butterfield 8, 1960. Even she hated the movie, calling it a piece of garbage. But after she was hospitalized with pneumonia, almost dying, the Academy handed her the award out of sympathy. The performance wasn't her best, but Hollywood loves a comeback story. Then there's Al Pacino. He finally won an Oscar for Scent of a Woman, 1992, but many believe it was just a makeup win for all the times he had been snubbed before. His performances in The Godfather, Serpico, and Dog Day Afternoon were legendary, yet he lost every time. By 1992, the Academy owed him one. And sometimes actors didn't even do the heavy lifting for their award-winning performances. Marlon Brando won Best Actor for The Godfather, 1972, but he refused the award and sent Native American activist Sachin Littlefeather to reject it in protest. His win became more about politics than the performance itself. John Wayne finally won an Oscar for True Grit, 1969, but most critics agreed it was more of a career award than a performance award. The Academy often gives Oscars not for the best work, but for the best timing. And let's not forget Shakespeare in Love, 1998, beating Saving Private Ryan for Best Picture. It wasn't talent that won, it was an aggressive campaign by producer Harvey Weinstein, who spent millions on marketing and swayed voters with expensive dinners and gifts. Oscars are supposed to reward the best, but behind the scenes, politics, timing, and industry favors play just as big a role as actual talent. If you thought the best performance always won, Hollywood has been lying to you again. The age lies. Hollywood keeps selling. Hollywood has a long history of lying about ages, shaving off years, adding a few, or straight up rewriting birth records. Why? Because in the film industry, age isn't just a number, it's a marketing tool. Doris Day was one of the biggest stars of the 1950s, but for decades, no one knew her real age. She believed she was born in 1924, but when she turned 95, public records revealed she was actually born in 1922. Even she had been fooled by the lie Hollywood created. Jessica Chastain kept her real birth year hidden for years, refusing to confirm how old she was. Why? Because actresses often get pushed out of lead roles once they hit a certain age. When she finally admitted she was born in 1977, fans were shocked. Hollywood had made her seem much younger. Mila Kunis had to lie in the opposite direction. She auditioned for That 70s Show at 14 years old, but because the casting call required actors to be 18, she told producers she would be turning 18 soon. Technically true, but also completely misleading. And then there's Rebel Wilson, who built her career on a larger-than-life persona but kept her birth year a mystery. It wasn't until an old classmate leaked her records that the truth came out. She was several years older than she had claimed. Age manipulation wasn't just for women. Cary Grant and Clark Gable had their ages adjusted early in their careers to make them seem younger. Meanwhile, some actors like Steve McQueen were aged up to make them appear more mature and leading man ready. So when you hear about a young rising star or a veteran actor who's still in their prime, take it with a grain of salt, because the numbers Hollywood gives you aren't always real. Actors Hollywood made look talented. Hollywood has spent decades convincing audiences that certain actors are naturally gifted, but behind the scenes, many relied on tricks, stand-ins, and a whole lot of editing to appear more skilled than they actually were. Take Marilyn Monroe, one of the most famous actresses in history, but on set, she struggled with basic lines, needing up to 60 takes for a single sentence. Directors had to piece together her performances from tiny clips, making her look flawless when, in reality, it was hours of frustration and retakes. Then there's Arnold Schwarzenegger. His early movies had him delivering lines with such a heavy accent that studios dubbed over his voice entirely. In his first film, Hercules in New York, 1970, another actor's voice was used because producers thought audiences wouldn't understand him. Singers weren't always who they seemed either. Natalie Wood starred in West Side Story, 1961, but her singing voice wasn't hers. It was dubbed by Marnie Nixon, who secretly sang for several major Hollywood actresses. Deborah Kerr in The King and I, also dubbed. Even Bruce Lee, a martial arts legend, didn't always perform his fight scenes in real time. In some films, his movements were too fast for cameras to capture properly, so editors had to slow them down. Meanwhile, his famous fight sounds? They were often added in post-production to enhance the effect. Some actors couldn't even dance. Jennifer Beals, who played the lead in Flashdance, 1983, barely did any of the dancing herself. A double did the hard moves, and careful editing made it look seamless. So, the next time you're blown away by an actor's incredible talent, ask yourself, how much of it was actually real? The truth about method acting. Dedication. Method acting is often sold as the ultimate mark of dedication. You've heard the stories, actors staying in character 24/7, pushing their bodies to the limit, and suffering for their craft. But here's the truth. A lot of it is just marketing. Take Jared Leto. He made headlines for sending used condoms and dead rats to his Suicide Squad 2016 co-stars to stay in character as the Joker. But when the movie came out, he had barely 10 minutes of screen time. The extreme behavior? Mostly hype. Christian Bale is famous for his drastic body transformations, losing 60 pounds for The Machinist, 2004, then bulking up for Batman Begins, 2005. Impressive? Absolutely. But was it necessary? Some argue no, especially since Hollywood has makeup, prosthetics, and CGI that could achieve the same effect safely. Daniel Day-Lewis is often called the king of method acting, but his dedication sometimes went too far. For My Left Foot, 1989, he refused to leave his wheelchair on set, making crew members carry him everywhere. For Gangs of New York, 2002, he caught pneumonia because he refused to wear modern winter clothes on set. His commitment was real, but at what cost? Meanwhile, Leonardo DiCaprio's infamous The Revenant, 2015 role involved eating raw bison liver and sleeping inside a dead animal carcass. It made for a great story, but the actual film could have been just as convincing without it. And let's talk about Robert De Niro, who gained 60 pounds for Raging Bull, 1980. While impressive, actors like Meryl Streep and Anthony Hopkins have argued that real skill comes from acting, not extreme physical changes. Hollywood loves method acting stories because they make performances sound more impressive. But behind the scenes, many of these so-called dedicated transformations are overhyped, unnecessary, and sometimes just PR stunts. Real talent isn't about starving yourself or staying in character for months. It's about delivering a great performance without making everyone suffer for it. Stars who faked their retirement. Hollywood is full of dramatic exits, big stars announcing they're done with the industry, only to pop up in another movie a few years later. Retirement in Hollywood is often just another publicity stunt. Take Daniel Day-Lewis. In 2017, he made a grand exit, declaring Phantom Thread would be his final film. But this wasn't his first retirement. He quit acting before, only to return in the 90s. Fans still wonder if he'll be back again. Steven Soderbergh, director of Ocean's 11 and Magic Mike, announced he was done with filmmaking in 2013. His reason? Hollywood was too exhausting. But within a few years, he was directing Logan Lucky, 2017, and jumping right back into the business. So much for retirement. Then there's Jay-Z, who held a massive farewell concert in 2003 and announced his retirement from music. The industry mourned. Then, in 2006, he dropped a new album like nothing happened. Turns out the retirement was just a great marketing move. Cher is the queen of fake retirements. In 2002, she embarked on her farewell tour, telling fans this was the last time they'd ever see her perform. That tour lasted 3 years. Then in 2014, she went back on the road. By 2018, she had yet another tour. At this point, fans expect her to retire every few years. Actors don't just retire for dramatic effect. Sometimes it's damage control. Nicolas Cage claimed he was done with major Hollywood movies after years of bad roles. Then, after Pig, 2021 earned critical praise. He walked back his statement. Suddenly, he wasn't done anymore. Hollywood retirements rarely stick. They create hype, nostalgia, and ticket sales. And when the money's right, the retired star suddenly finds a reason to return. Some celebrities defy time, while others, they look like they've lived 1,000 lives. From once golden icons to unrecognizable figures, these 30 stars didn't just age, they transformed in ways no one saw coming. Take Clara Bow, the original It girl. In the Roaring '20s, she was the face of silent film, a flapper-era icon whose energy and charisma made her an audience favorite. But when talkies arrived, so did a new level of scrutiny. She had a Brooklyn accent that didn't match the era's leading lady expectations, and gossip columns were ruthless. Mental health struggles and a series of scandals pushed her further from the spotlight. By the 1940s, she was done with Hollywood, retreating into a life of isolation. But the damage was done. By the time she was in her 50s, she looked years older, the weight of past fame written all over her face. Mickey Rooney had the opposite problem. He never really left the industry, but Hollywood certainly left him behind. A child star who ruled the box office in the 30s and 40s, Rooney aged in a way the studios couldn't package. By adulthood, his boyish looks didn't translate into leading man roles, and his personal life was even messier. 6 marriages, financial ruin, and a reputation for being difficult. The stress aged him prematurely. By the time he was in his later years, he looked nothing like the fresh-faced actor who once stole scenes alongside Judy Garland. And then there was Marlon Brando. In the 50s, he was the gold standard. A streetcar named Desire, On the Waterfront, The Wild One. He was Hollywood's most intense, rugged leading man. But Brando never cared for maintaining a Hollywood image. By the 70s, his weight gain was noticeable. By the 90s, it was staggering. He reportedly weighed over 300 pounds, barely leaving his home in his final years. In the 1960s, Judy Garland is the textbook case of Hollywood's cruelty. She was a child star when MGM turned her into a product, feeding her pills to wake her up, keep her thin, and put her to sleep. By her 40s, the damage was irreversible. The luminous teenager who sang Over the Rainbow had aged beyond her years. Exhaustion, addiction, and years of stress had taken a visible toll. Her once youthful glow was replaced by a frail, weary appearance. By the time she was found dead in a London apartment at 47, her body had already given up long before. But Garland wasn't the only star whose once radiant presence dimmed under the weight of addiction and exhaustion. Richard Burton, known for his booming voice and intense screen presence, was one of the most charismatic actors of his generation. But off-screen, he was just as famous for his hard-drinking lifestyle. By the time he entered his 50s, years of alcohol abuse had left him visibly aged. The dashing star of Cleopatra and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf no longer had the sharp features and commanding presence that once made him irresistible. Friends described his later years as a struggle, with Burton himself admitting, "I have to drink to live and I have to drink to stop living." His once powerful frame grew gaunt, his face deeply lined, proof that decades of excess had finally caught up. Then there's Brigitte Bardot, a sex symbol who ruled the 60s with effortless beauty and undeniable charisma. But unlike many of her contemporaries, she chose to reject Hollywood's obsession with youth. By the time she stepped away from the spotlight, she had no interest in maintaining the illusion of eternal beauty. Wrinkles and aging didn't scare her. She embraced them. Instead of fighting time with surgery, she turned to activism, dedicating her later years to animal rights. Her transformation from screen goddess to recluse was shocking to some, but to her, it was liberation. In the 60s, these stars were at the top. By the time the next decade rolled in, their reflections told a different story. Linda Blair became a household name after The Exorcist, 1973. The film made her a horror icon, but Hollywood didn't know what to do with her afterward. She took roles in B-movies, struggled with personal issues, and ran into legal trouble, including a high-profile drug arrest in 1977. By the time she tried to revive her career in the 80s, the industry had moved on. Years of stress, fluctuating weight, and personal struggles took a toll. By middle age, she barely resembled the fresh-faced teen who once terrified audiences. Fame can be a double-edged sword, and for some, its sharpest cuts come long after the spotlight fades. Jan Michael Vincent had the looks and talent of a leading man. Hollywood saw him as the next Paul Newman, and with films like Big Wednesday, 1978, and the TV series Airwolf, 1984 to 1986, he had everything going for him, but he was his own worst enemy. Decades of alcohol abuse destroyed his career and his health. He was involved in multiple drunk driving accidents, with one in 1996 leaving him with severe nerve damage to his face. By his later years, he had lost a leg due to complications from an infection. The once dashing leading man was unrecognizable by the time he passed away in 2019. And then there was David Cassidy, teen idol, musician, and the face of the Partridge Family. 1970 to 1974, he spent the 70s dodging screaming fans and living the rock star dream. But by his 30s, the industry had moved on, and his career never fully recovered. Decades of heavy drinking took a toll on his appearance, making him look much older than his years. In 2017, he publicly admitted he was battling dementia, though the damage of alcoholism had already left its mark. His tragic final years were a stark contrast to his youthful, boyish image from the 70s. The 80s was a decade of indulgence. Big hair, big egos, and even bigger consequences. Some stars made it out intact, but others, not so much. Gary Busey was once the ultimate tough guy actor, earning an Oscar nomination for the Buddy Holly story in 1978. But a decade later, everything changed. In 1988, he crashed his motorcycle at high speed without a helmet. He survived, but the damage was permanent. The traumatic brain injury altered not just his personality, but also his physical appearance. His face became more rigid, his expressions less controlled, and over the years, his once rugged good looks took a drastic turn. The accident, paired with years of erratic behavior and alleged substance use, left him looking far older than his actual age. Not all transformations come from reckless decisions. Some happen without warning. Kathleen Turner ruled the 80s. That husky voice, commanding presence, and knockout looks made her a go-to leading lady in Body Heat, Romancing the Stone, and The War of the Roses. But behind the scenes, something was changing. In the 90s, Turner was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, a chronic autoimmune disease that attacks the joints, causing severe pain and swelling. The treatments were brutal. The medication, combined with the physical toll of the disease, altered her appearance in ways she couldn't control. By the early 2000s, fans were stunned. Her features had softened, her movements slowed, and the transformation was impossible to ignore. Then there's Val Kilmer. The man was Iceman. He was Jim Morrison. In Top Gun: In the Doors, he didn't just play cool, he was cool. But by the 2000s, something was off. His weight fluctuated dramatically, fueling endless tabloid speculation. Whispers of health issues spread, but Kilmer denied it all. Then, in 2015, the truth came out. He had been battling throat cancer. The treatment was grueling. Surgeries and radiation took their toll, leaving him frail. His once powerful voice forever altered. By the time he re-emerged, fans barely recognized him. The transformation was shocking. The man who once exuded effortless charisma had been changed in ways no one could have predicted. Decades of non-stop touring, drug-fueled nights, and reckless living left some of rock's biggest icons nearly unrecognizable. Axl Rose was the 80s. The Guns N' Roses frontman had the cheekbones, the swagger, and the raw stage presence that made him larger than life. Then came the 2000s. Fans barely recognized him. His face looked dramatically different, sparking endless rumors. Plastic surgery, weight fluctuations, the toll of a hard-partying past. His once slender frame expanded, and speculation about failed cosmetic work only added fuel to the fire. The welcome to the jungle rock god was gone, replaced by a version even die-hard fans struggled to accept. Steven Tyler, on the other hand, never hid his rock star vices. Heroin, cocaine, and decades of excess ran through his veins as much as his music did. While he still oozes rock star charm, the years have left their mark. His once smooth skin is now deeply lined, his features worn from a lifetime of indulgence. He still struts like the 20-something kid who sang Dream On, but his face tells a different story, one of survival and consequence. If anyone should be a medical anomaly, it's Ozzy Osbourne. By his own admission, he's done enough drugs and alcohol to take down an army. His body has survived everything, decades of substance abuse, a near-fatal ATV accident in 2003, and ongoing health battles. By the 2010s, the years caught up. Deep lines, sunken eyes, and permanent slurred speech became his new reality. The Prince of Darkness still endures, but the toll is impossible to ignore. The 90s was the era of blockbuster cinema, TV heartthrobs, and larger-than-life icons. Some reinvented themselves. Others weren't as lucky. Whether through personal struggles, career missteps, or simply time itself, some stars faded in ways no one expected. Brendan Fraser was one of the Hollywood stars of the 90s. The Mummy, George of the Jungle, Encino Man. His mix of comedic charm and leading man appeal made him box office gold. But behind the scenes, his body was breaking down. Years of high-impact stunts left him with serious injuries, requiring multiple surgeries on his back, knees, and vocal cords. His career slowed. A painful divorce and financial struggles made things worse. By the 2010s, his once athletic frame had changed, and he looked drastically different from the star audiences remembered. It wasn't until The Whale that Fraser made his big comeback, but his transformation over the years remained undeniable. Time away from Hollywood can be just as startling as the years spent in it. No one knows that better than Macaulay Culkin. The Home Alone star was the ultimate 90s child actor, but like many before him, growing up in the industry took a toll. By his 20s, he walked away from Hollywood. When he reappeared, fans were shocked. He looked frail, gaunt, and much older than his years. Tabloids speculated about substance abuse, though he denied it. His disheveled appearance had people concerned, but in recent years he's turned things around. His 40s look healthier than his early 30s ever did. Some transformations feel even more dramatic when they happen to figures once seen as invincible. Just look at Mike Tyson. In his prime, he was an unstoppable force, a heavyweight champion who struck fear into opponents with sheer power and intimidation. But the years weren't kind. Brutal fights, legal troubles, and financial missteps wore him down. By the 2000s, deep lines, weight gain, and a tired look made him seem far older than his age. For professional athletes, time isn't a luxury. It's an opponent they can never truly defeat. The relentless physical toll, the pressures of fame, and the lifestyle that comes with it often accelerate aging. Some retire gracefully, others go through transformations so shocking, even their biggest fans barely recognize them. Wayne Rooney is a prime example of a superstar who aged well beyond his years. He burst onto the scene as a teenager, England's golden boy, and a powerhouse forward with a relentless playing style. But by his late 20s, his body seemed to betray him. The years of carrying Manchester United and the England national team took a visible toll. His hair loss became a major talking point, leading to multiple transplants. While many footballers stay youthful into their 30s, Rooney's rugged, battle-worn look made him seem far older than his actual age. Basketball isn't any easier on the body. Shawn Kemp was a force in the NBA, a 6-time All-Star with explosive dunks and freakish athleticism. In the 90s, his lean, chiseled frame made him unstoppable with the Seattle Supersonics. But after retirement, things changed fast. Kemp's weight skyrocketed to over 300 pounds, a stark contrast to his high-flying prime. While plenty of athletes struggle to stay in peak shape post-career, his transformation was particularly shocking for fans who remembered him at his best. Then there's Diego Maradona, a legend who burned bright but paid the ultimate price for excess. The Argentine icon was worshipped for his dazzling footwork and the infamous Hand of God goal. On the pitch, he was untouchable. Off it, chaos, post-retirement, drug addiction, weight gain, and severe health issues took over. By the time of his passing in 2020, he was nearly unrecognizable from his World Cup glory days. Hospitalizations, scandals, and struggles with addiction painted a tragic picture of what happens when the body and mind can't keep up with the legend. Hollywood demands perfection, but aging is inevitable. Some embrace it, others fight it. And when plastic surgery goes wrong, the results are irreversible and often shocking. Mickey Rourke was once one of the most ruggedly handsome actors of his generation, a heartthrob in films like 9½ Weeks and Angel Heart. But after stepping away from acting to pursue professional boxing, his face took a beating, literally. Multiple injuries led him to undergo reconstructive surgeries, but the results were far from what he expected. His once chiseled jawline became distorted, and his features appeared unnatural. Over the years, he admitted to making mistakes with surgery, saying, "Most of it was to mend the mess of my boxing injuries, but I went to the wrong guy to fix my face." Fans were stunned by his drastic transformation, with some barely recognizing him when he returned to Hollywood in the 2000s. If there's one name that comes up in almost every discussion about botched plastic surgery, it's Donatella Versace. The iconic designer is known for her luxury fashion empire, but her face has been a major topic of speculation for decades. While she has never fully confirmed what procedures she's had, experts suggest excessive fillers, facelifts, and lip augmentation contributed to her dramatically altered appearance. By the early 2000s, her once striking features looked stretched and unnatural. Instead of looking younger, her cosmetic enhancements became more infamous than her fashion work. But she's far from the only celebrity whose transformation sparked endless speculation. Just look at Meg Ryan, who defined the rom-com era of the 90s. With her effortless charm and natural beauty, she was a household name. But when she reappeared in the 2000s, the focus shifted away from her career and onto her face. Speculation about lip fillers, Botox, and facelifts overshadowed her acting talent. Fans who had adored her in When Harry Met Sally and Sleepless in Seattle were shocked at how different she looked. While she's never confirmed details about the procedures, her transformation became one of the most widely discussed in Hollywood history. With constant public scrutiny and high-pressure lifestyles, many turned to drastic measures to keep up appearances. But time, bad decisions, and questionable procedures often had the opposite effect. Sharon Osbourne has never been shy about her plastic surgery. Over the years, she's been open about facelifts, Botox, and other cosmetic enhancements. But even she admitted when things went too far. After a facelift in 2021, she looked at herself and thought, "I looked like one of those fucking mummies." The work left her face distorted, and she eventually had some of it corrected. The relentless pursuit of perfection has led many down a path of drastic change, and Janice Dickinson was no exception. She made a name for herself as the world's first supermodel, but in later years her appearance became more about plastic surgery than high fashion. At her peak, she was one of the most striking women in the industry, but the chase for eternal youth led to years of extreme procedures, facelifts, Botox, fillers, and more. By the time she was judging America's Next Top Model, her exaggerated look had become a talking point. In recent years, she's been more accepting of aging, but there was a period when her obsession with surgery overshadowed her legacy. Not all dramatic transformations stem from Hollywood's beauty standards. Sometimes they happen in the most unexpected corners of entertainment. Scott Thompson, better known as Carrot Top, was once a quirky, red-headed comedian with a signature wild-haired look. But when he transitioned to a long-term Las Vegas residency, something changed. Fans started noticing his face looked completely different. Rumors swirled about Botox, fillers, and even plastic surgery, though he's denied most of it. The combination of aging, dramatic muscle gain, and possible cosmetic work made him almost unrecognizable. Whether intentional or not, Carrot Top's transformation became one of the most shocking among entertainers. Money, power, and influence can buy a lot, but they can't stop time or erase the effects of self-destruction. And few stars embodied that downfall quite like Charlie Sheen, who wasn't just a TV star. He was a phenomenon. In the 2000s, he became the highest-paid actor on television, pulling in nearly $1.8 million per episode for 2.5 Men. But behind the scenes, things were unraveling fast. His well-documented battles with substance abuse, public feuds, and a chaotic personal life took a serious toll. By his infamous 2011 meltdown, where he coined the phrase winning while clearly doing the opposite, his appearance had changed drastically. The once sharp features and youthful energy were gone, replaced by a visibly aged, gaunt look. Years of hard living had caught up, and even after stepping out of the spotlight, the damage was done. Self-destruction in Hollywood doesn't discriminate by age, and few stars proved that more than Lindsay Lohan, who was once the industry's undeniable it girl. The success of The Parent Trap, Mean Girls, and Freaky Friday made her one of the most in-demand young actresses of the 2000s. But by the time she hit her early 20s, she was more famous for DUIs and court appearances than films. Endless nights of partying, mugshots, and multiple stints in rehab visibly aged her beyond her years. By the time she attempted a career comeback in her late 20s, she looked significantly older than her peers. While she has since cleaned up her image, the toll of those reckless years remains visible. Few actors held on to their mystique as well as Johnny Depp, until they didn't. For years, he was the face of quirky, rebellious Hollywood cool, whether in Pirates of the Caribbean, Edward Scissorhands, or Sweeney Todd. But by the late 2000s and 10s, the combination of financial troubles, personal lawsuits, and years of reported excessive drinking started to show. Once known for his sculpted cheekbones and sharp style, he now appears bloated and weary, looking much older than his 60 years. The legal battles against his ex-wife and the public scrutiny surrounding his personal life only added to the visible stress. Fame can preserve a star's image in history, but real life always catches up. For these celebrities, the harsh truth is that no amount of fortune or influence can undo time's relentless march.